Welcome all. Thanks for joining. We're going to be prompt and get started here right on time. I'm Danielle Brommer. I'm the Chief Growth Officer here at Lean Techniques, and I'll be kicking us off and helping guide today's conversation. We're really excited you're here because what we're talking about today isn't just a recap of reInvent. It's about what all the announcements mean for you as leaders and IT engineers over the next year. This was actually my first time attending reInvent in person, and if you've ever been, you know it's a lot. It's overwhelming, but in a really energizing way. And I walked away knowing that AWS is on a mission to make AI and cloud accessible to all. And of course, I was grateful to have the folks on this call, which I will introduce to you shortly, help me navigate the event. Las Vegas hosted 60,000 attendees. There were over 2 million online viewers and 3,500 sessions. I can confidently say we didn't even scratch the surface of what was available. And there were 530 total updates. And I promise we won't bore you covering them all today. For those of you who may be new to us, Lean Techniques is a modern technology consultancy firm focused on helping organizations build, modernize, and run software that actually delivers business outcomes. We work at the intersection of cloud, custom software, and now AI-enabled delivery, helping teams move faster without increasing risk. A big part of how we do that is through our deep partnership with AWS. Over the past few years, and especially over the last 12 months, AWS has become the platform where the pace of innovation is simply unmatched. From infrastructure economics to modernization tooling to the rapid rise of agentic software, AWS is shaping how software is built and operated going forward. That's why Lean Techniques is investing even more deeply into our partnership, not just to keep up with the new services, but to help our customers like you translate innovation into execution. Our focus is making these capabilities practical, secure, and usable by real teams with real constraints. Now, why does reInvent 2025 matter so much? At a macro level, this year's announcements all point to a few clear shifts. Software delivery is accelerating dramatically. AI agents are becoming embedded across the SDL and operations, and the historical trade-offs between speed, cost, and quality are being removed. This isn't about one tool or one service. It's about a structural change in how technology organizations operate and what you're capable of achieving. Today's agenda is designed to help you cut through the noise. We'll cover what's changing, what's actually usable right now, and where leaders and teams should focus next. Again, not 530 updates. Here's what we plan to cover today. The next 12 months outlook, agentic software delivery and monitoring, modernization at speed, infrastructure and cost decisions, and the next 90 days. Today I have with me Tim Gifford, our Chief Innovation Officer, Josh Angolano, Principal Engineer, and René Rios, Senior Software Engineer. Feel free to drop questions into the chat as we go. We'll have dedicated time for Q&A toward the end. I'm now going to hand it over to Tim. He's going to kick us off by zooming out a bit and helping frame what's changing, what to expect, and where leaders should start paying attention now so they're not reacting later. Tim, take it away.
Thanks, Danielle. So before we get into what things are going to change over the next 12 months, I want to go back like maybe 10 years or so. About 10 years ago, there was a lot of the Agile and Scrum was taking over the teams, and I noticed that QAs and BAs were being disrupted. QAs by automated software or automated testing, and BAs from the Scrum and product owner roles from Scrum. And I felt like developers felt really sure of themselves. They felt really confident that they were safe. And so what I had this thought experiment. I said, what if we had a coder in a box? We had a black box, that if you fed it specifications, it could iterate on different outcomes until it got to a working software that made all those specifications pass. It was kind of, back then I was thinking about, millions of monkeys working on millions of typewriters could eventually come up with a system that worked. And so now we've almost got to a reality of that. But back then I would talk about this idea of, if you had this system, would you care what the software looked like? Would you care what the code actually looked like? And generally, every person I talked to, every software engineer I talked to said yes, because I'm going to need to add a new feature. I'm going to make a change to the system, or I'm going to need to optimize the code or replatform it to a new version, or I'm going to need to make it faster. And I said, well, for each of those, all you're going to do is you're going to create a new spec, and you're going to feed it to the black box, and the black box is going to come up with working software. So 10 years ago, we were talking about this, and I think now we've actually got generative AI that's getting us closer and closer to this reality. Now, Werner Vogels, a CTO over at AWS, talked about in the closing keynote this idea of Renaissance developers. And he was really trying to talk about the elephant in the room, which was Is this going to take my job? And so he went back even farther in time and he talked about how your job has changed since the 1960s, 1970s. We were writing code for the machine. We were worried about correctness and efficiencies. Then we get to the 80s. We get high level languages. I remember in the 80s, we were talking about COBOL was going to be programming in English, and that was how we were going to interact with the machines and the computers. And we abstracted away the machine code and we started writing for human programmers. We focused on the algorithms and the data structures and maintainability. And then in the 90s, we started getting more frameworks and GUIs. We had a graphical front ends. We started programming for human users, not just for programmers. We started making sure that things were reusable, and we focused a lot on the frameworks. And then we got to the 20s, we started distributing. 20s, the 2000s, we started distributing over the internet. Now we took what was hard by building it locally and we started spreading it all over the world. So we started focusing on latency, making sure things were consistent, making sure that we could scale as we had more users. As we got more into the DevOps space, the cloud, we wanted reliability, resiliency, elasticity. We focused more on cost and operations. We wanted to make sure things were absolutely secure as more people were moving into the public clouds. We get into where we are today. We are being augmented by AI, code generation, and agents. What we need to focus on now is not necessarily the code as much, but we need to make sure that we're applying our human judgment, our ethics, and focusing on the business outcomes. And then what's that look like in 2030? I, of course, don't know, but it feels like we're going to continue to be assisted by AIs and machine assisted for our own judgments. And we're going to be really interested in making sure that we're designing for the whole, where trust is going to be even more important. We're going to make sure that humans are in the loop and that we're thinking about the whole broader impact of the things that we're creating, the socioeconomic impacts. And as we evolve, so must our tools. So we continue to get better and change over time. The other thing that Werner's was focused on is kind of there's a couple different 5 core competencies that you should focus on as a Renaissance developer. He took us back to the Renaissance where people were learning a bunch of different things and there was a bunch of change happening at the time. And the first thing to keep in mind is this theme that the tools, the work is yours and not the tools. You are ultimately responsible for the work that you have. And so he gave us these 5 different core competencies. 1, don't lose your curiosity, but continue to seek out new ways these tools and techniques can improve yourself, your organization, our industry and our society. Number 2, think in systems. So lift your head up and see how things are happening across more than just what you're working on. Think broadly about how a change in one part of the system is going to impact others. A core tenet in Lean is systems thinking in the whole. Theory of constraints is thinking about making sure that one change isn't suboptimal to the overall system. Number 3, communicate with precision. We used to do machine code, bits, ones and zeros, assembly. That was a very precise way of communicating with machines. Now we got to a point where we started talking in programmatic languages, and now that specificity is going to be, and that precision is going to be maybe in the human language. It may be given when then specifications that we can give to the black box to help generate the code for us. But that precise communication is just as important today and even more so than maybe it was in the past. Number 4 is really about making sure that the human is in the loop. You are what you create. It is not the machines, it is yours. You are still responsible. AI can't be sued yet. So I believe one area of why code generation has become so popular as an area of innovation is because, in the legal profession, medical, financial, AIs can't make those decisions because a human's still going to be there. So they're very cautious about that. In programming languages, we tend to not be as regulated. So there's some more innovation that can happen in that space, both good and bad. And then finally, Werner's talked about this idea of being polymath, which is one who knows many things, not one who knows many types of math. But your domain expertise that you have in your existing systems, your businesses, the tools and techniques that you've used throughout your entire career, all of those things can be pulled together to create new innovation that maybe we have never had because we didn't have this capability before. One area that I believe is going to be critical in understanding how we leverage or how you're going to leverage is understanding how to leverage our data assets better. So I want people to continue to be curious around how to deal with data. Normally, these data teams have existed on their own. They live outside the delivery teams or shared services. But as the AI agents and using these AI assisted tools are going to be more commonplace, having that data available to the teams is going to be more critical. I feel it's similar to what it was during DevOps and cloud engineering when that was getting started, where we had these platform teams off to the side. And it always starts that way as a specialty, but eventually teams need these skills to be more integrated with their teams. The same thing is going to happen with this data space. The context that you need to make good decisions is in that data, and we need to make sure that that context and data is available on every team. That context is really the competitive advantage that your company has that other companies don't have. And so that's going to become even more critical in the next few years. Moving on, the next, taking that data, and the reason those data skills are important is because there's a new way of programming that's emerging, and it's this idea of programming neural nets and models. And in order to program these, we need a way to change them for better outcomes. You know, we get all these LLMs, which are general models, but we have all this data internally to organizations. How do we get that fed in to get better outcomes? And there's a lot of ways to program these neural nets or models, and they have different costs and expected outcomes. And the one on the far left is prompts and retrieval augmented generation, where you can set up a different system prompt and you can have it hook up to different data sets. And that's helpful for understanding better knowledge and getting better understanding of that knowledge. But when you really want to change behaviors, you've got to do more supervised fine tuning. And as you get up higher in these capabilities, they be way more expensive. One of the new capabilities that I'm really excited about is what NovaForge has announced. And I'll get into that in 1 second. But the next slide, I want to kind of talk about the next thing. So that we talk about building these models, but now we want to optimize them for usage and running them. And I threw this in here because I think it's an interesting way to think about it. As we want to optimize these models, we kind of have a couple different opportunities. We cache our prompts, which is a way when you ask for something, if you've already asked something similar, it would not hit the LLM, it will just return the previous response. So that doesn't cost you tokens. The other ways we can optimize these models is to quantize, which I think of lowering the resolution. So making it a little more blurry, so you kind of get the idea of what's going on, but you're not getting the resolution of high def. It'll give you an idea of what's going on, but it may not give you the precision that maybe you would get with a higher resolution model, but it's going to be a lot cheaper. And the other way that you can optimize a model for runtime is this idea of distillation, which I think of as zooming in to a specific area. You keep the same type of resolution, but you're only concerned about this area. So in your business, you may try to zoom in and distill for your specific area so that you have the same resolution and can answer more interesting questions from that. Now, what they've done with Amazon NovaForge, which is really really innovative, is they're trying to make Gen AI as commonplace as they made compute with EC2. They are giving their frontier model and they're allowing you to mix in your proprietary data and generate a frontier model that's at the same level of quality that you would get from any of the big model providers today. But this model would be trained on your data and provide different behaviors that you want as opposed to just the knowledge. So they're making this more affordable. Now, it's not super affordable. We're still talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it's a first step in what I believe a lot of companies are going to be doing, which is training other specific models for themselves. So how is all this going to impact your teams? I kind of think about how those teams have been, our delivery teams have been for the past few years. What I think is going to be more interesting is, human insight's still going to be important. The work is still yours. We need human to be in the loop. I think we're going to have more like product strategists are going to be more into this space. You're going to have new capabilities where you can simulate and you can do prediction. This idea of a business analyst, which was threatened for many years, I think is going to come back. It might change. AWS used this term insight orchestrator, which is this idea of taking business analytics, a business analysis, workflow, all the business processes are going to have to change and becoming that business process change leader. When we start adding agentic systems into our organization, it's going to change how people do their day-to-day work. So we're going to need somebody that can help with the change effort, integrating the data and the automated agents into those business processes, which is going to be more than just a technical problem. I think your software engineers are going to get more agentic support. You're going to have a few of them. We'll talk a little bit about Kiro and spec-driven development, some of those agents. I think they're going to become more orchestrators than they are strictly builders. They're going to have new tools like AWS Transform that can help eliminate tech debt or reduce the cost of removing that debt quite a bit. Again, your data people, I think, are going to start to integrate onto the teams. I think there's going to be more small specialized models that are going to be used by businesses, and we're going to need the experts in order to how to get the data in a place where it can be used with embedded into vector databases. And then, for operations, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity there. You're going to be able to simulate costs over spikes of demand. You're going to have security sentinels that are running all the time to make sure we've got some of these things already. Make sure that you're in compliance and that they're going to be aware of any security issues that are introduced into the system on a more frequent basis. And then, that on-call type situation, I think there's going to be, sentinels, there's going to be agents that are looking at your logs all the time. And when there's an error in production, it's going to find a way to patch it, find a solution for it, give you a pull request, and have a human go in and review it. But ultimately, that context is super important. The idea of building teams that are building and running the software is going to be even more important because the people who create it are going to be the ones that are going to quickly know what needs to be done if there is a problem. And we can't distribute that across multiple teams as well. But these teams are going to be highly supplemented by specialized agents that are both custom developed internally and also commercial. You're going to be buying these things and integrating them onto your team. I think now what I'm going to do is hand it off over to Josh. He'll dig a little bit more into the agentic software delivery, and you'll hear more from me later when I start talking about what to do in the next 90 days. Take it away, Josh.
Thanks, Tim. Yes, we're going to start talking about agentic software and delivery and monitoring. We're going to start by talking about Kiro. This was the big announcement that AWS had. So they have an agent that you can now delegate tasks to. This is similar to the GitHub Copilot agent. If you're familiar with that, you can give it work and it will go ahead and accomplish those software tasks for you. Another cool agent, and these are all frontier agents that Amazon is pushing out there for the whole software delivery lifecycle. So you'll hear, I think one of the themes this year coming out that you're going to hear a lot is agentic software delivery lifecycle, or AI SDLC. I've heard that term quite a bit. So in that vein, they also have a security agent that runs penetration tests on your code as your application. It can also recommend security fixes, which is kind of cool. And then it will open a PR for those fixes. You can also upload code diagrams and get security recommendations while you're developing. So this is like having a security architect right with you to bounce ideas off of while you're writing the code. So as Tim mentioned, the DevOps revolution, we were kind of shifting left. This allows you to even shift left more with security and go get that outside resource. Finally, they have a DevOps agent, which takes in data from several different sources and will go in and try and mitigate infrastructure problems proactively for you. Or it will open pull requests for issues it's seeing based on your logs from like CloudWatch or Kibana or any other logging source. So it's kind of pretty cool. Next, we're going to talk about Kiro. This is their agentic coding assistant that's very similar to Claude Code. So if you're familiar with Claude Code, I was super excited to hear that this was coming out and would allow you, and Amazon will indemnify you for any code generated by Kiro. So hopefully enterprises will see this as more of something they're willing to adopt in the same vein they've been willing to adopt Copilot from GitHub. You can do that vibe and spec coding. So you can give it a spec. It breaks down the different tasks. It uses MCP servers so that you can go and get more information. I think over the coming year, we're starting to see a lot of frameworks and vendors provide MCP servers for common coding tasks. I know that Angular, they just released one with their latest release because it was so different from the previous release. So if you're working with Kiro and doing Angular code, for example, you can integrate with the Angular MCP server and get coding suggestions that apply directly to the version of the framework you're using. And finally, you can set up hooks. So I use this all the time where I have Kiro commit after each one of those little steps because I believe that engineers, we still want to work in small steps We don't want to hand out a bunch of work to an agent and have it generate 2,000 lines of code, because as Warner said, and as Tim mentioned, you're still responsible for that code at the end of the day. So having hooks for things like linting and committing code are really useful. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about security agent. I did a little bit of some deep dive here. We scanned one of our repos to see what it could do, and it found a high finding. It then talked about what the finding was, and finally it opened a PR within our repo for the changes. So still have to review the code, but I didn't have to go through and do a ton of security work. It was like having that security work as a friend. It's very nice because it shows you, it breaks them down by high, moderate, low, or if they're informational, and kind of what the risks are. It goes through, if you read the descriptions on one of these, talks about how it can be exploited, and even shows you some of the exploits in the description. So it's really nice tool to have, similar to how, you may be using Copilot to review your code. Now you can use Copilot to pen test your app, review it, and provide you some feedback on how to fix the security items. Amazon Bedrock also had a lot of changes this year, and I think they're trying to finally make it an enterprise tool where deploying agents is as quick as pointing and clicking, as well as providing the policies and the controls around agents. So we don't want agents to run loose in our system and, for example, return a bunch of money, or we don't want to delegate work to an agent to approve a claim that's $1 million, right? We still want a human in the loop, but maybe an agent or a claim that's $5,000 we want to allow. So Amazon's really thought about this over the year, and what they're doing is they're releasing all these tools for enterprises so that they can do things like put in policies to see what the agent can and can't do, or you can control that. You can also assess the performance of your agent. Which tools are your agent calling? Why are they calling them? When are they calling? Are those tools giving you back the information you need? You can also get custom metrics. How long is it taking to call those? And underneath this all, I was pretty excited, the evaluations uses open telemetry. So it uses an open standard. So you can pull that data from the evaluation system into anything like Datadog, CloudWatch, Dynatrace, et cetera, and see that evaluation performance right in with your monitoring dashboards. I'm going to turn it over to René to talk about modernization at speed.
Hi, I'm René, and I'm going to be talking about AWS Transform. So what is it and what does it do? So AWS Transform is an agentic AI that solves coding infrastructure and workload modernization problems. It's built on 15 years of AWS experience. So it's leveraging all of their tools and just adding the AI that will know how to use the tools and when to use those tools. The key thing that AWS Transform, what the offering is meant to do, is shift your teams away from technical debt and manual transformation of modernization projects and move them into innovation and automated flows. What can it do? So it has an ability to transform .NET projects into modern .NET. So if you're dealing with .NET 4, which is .NET Framework, it'll skip core and go straight into modern .NET, which will save you a lot of money in freeing you up from being stuck on a Windows machine. Now you can be in a Linux machine, and that gives you some advantages. It can do VMware transformation, so move your VM that are on-prem and move them into the cloud in a very automatic way. So it can put those VMs into EC2 instances, do all the right things, and then get you up and going. And so that saves you in licensing, right? You can convert these machines that are in Windows running a VM, now they can be out of a VM and into a Linux box. So now you save money in your licensing. Those that are in the insurance and financial institution industries, mainframes and COBOL, those are ancient machines that are still around, and they're giving you a serious innovation bottleneck, right? So imagine that you can take those COBOL mainframes and convert them into modern Java with modern architecture. Imagine what else you can do and what you can provide to your clients and customers if you're into a more modern and more efficient system. Things that I'm really excited about are these custom transformations. So it can take Angular for say, and let's say that you acquire a new company and most of their code is, most of their applications are all built on Angular framework, and now your shop is all React. That's what you guys know, and that's what now you need to support Angular. So you're kind of in that weird space of like, oh, we'll learn it, we'll figure it out. But imagine if you can convert that over into React, and now you have your developers just own it, right? That's one of the things that custom transformation does. It does a lot of updates from Java runtime. So you can take a Java runtime that's a little bit older and automatically move it into a new one. It does Java, Node.js, Python, and yeah. And then finally, it does assessments. And with assessments, it's kind of looking at your system from an economic standpoint. It'll start finding optimizations that you can add into your system. So let's say that you have a EC2 instance or the cluster of EC2 instances that is not correctly sized. It will tell you based on data, because it's scouring all of your logs and it's getting all that insight. It says, oh, well, that's one thing that we can optimize on. Okay. So now we're going to move into the key outcomes and benefits. And this is really talking about the speed to value equation. So you can tweak the speed and you can tweak the value proposition by being more efficient in your overhead. And so the promise of AWS Transform is that it will get you 4 to 5 times modernization speed. So a project that will typically take you a year, now this is supposed to do it in a lot faster, right? Customization optimization or cost optimization is all about saving you money on licensing and increasing and getting you the right size infrastructure. And at the end of the day, all of this is saving you money and time, which allows you to leverage your current developers to innovate, to add new digital products, create new initiatives, and solve the hardest problems from your customers. And now that I said all this, I want to put some proof in the pudding, right? And so I'm going to talk briefly about some case studies. This is Thomson Reuters. They're a news organization focusing on business news. Their world was all .NET, and they were in the old world of .NET framework, and they needed to modernize, and they needed to upgrade into the modern .NET, which is .NET 8, where this case study was .NET 8. And they achieved a 4-time boost in velocity. Another key point is that they had a cost savings of 30% from just migrating from Windows into Linux boxes. This is huge. Moving on to Vector. Vector Limited is an energy and telecom company in New Zealand. They used AWS Transform to migrate VMware into EC2 instances. And the process that we're doing manually was, they managed to achieve a 34% reduction in that migration time. And the big key point of this is the decrease of 35% of their total cost of ownership. That's huge. From just migrating from VMware and Windows boxes into EC2 instances running Linux, that saved them a whole lot of money. And so finally, we're going to go for the big hitter. This is Toyota Motors, and this is Toyota Motors America. They're an automaker. They took a 45-year-old mainframe system that was responsible for 90% of their supply chain and converted it into a Java application that continually ran. So it was like a seamless transformation. As the responsibilities of the mainframe kept decreasing, the responsibility of the Java code kept increasing, right? And so it was a seamless transformation. And they could have only done this by using Transform, because when you apply Transform into this world of COBOL transformations, what it does is it creates first a documented and an exploration phase, right? Where you're going in and getting a deep understanding of what your COBOL application is doing and what your mainframe is doing. And then have that validated, having the person in the middle going in and saying, yes, this is exactly what it's doing. I agree with this. And then creating a plan of execution that is doing all the conversions, and you can tweak it so that it's like, okay, this is the most important feature that I want, or that's really important, but it's high risk. I want to test this out, so I'm going to go with something that is less important. And slowly they kept executing on that plan, producing the Java code, and then executing it. So, one of the big hitters here was hundreds of modules and documentation, which is super important when you're dealing with a legacy machine like this or system like this in a single day. That is super impressive. So that is it for me, and I'm going to pass it over to Josh again.
Thanks, Renee. So I'm going to talk about cost and infrastructure decisions. One of the big themes this year was cost benefit and AWS wanting to be your cloud provider and your cheapest cloud provider, so you don't even have to think about that. They also have some new features where I'm going to go over. So Lambda now can be paused and restarted, which is huge. So now you're not having to manage long-running processes on EC2. You can use Lambda, have it go do the work, wait while another task is running, and then have it return the results to you. Lambda can also run on EC2. So if you want to use specialized hardware or specialized compute, you can do that now by choosing that and then having Lambda run on that. RDS is now bumped up to 256 terabytes. This is a big bump. I think it's about 4 times what they previously supported. S3 tables now in AWS, so you can store data in a table format. You were able to do that last year, but now it supports intelligent tiering, which means that you're able to get charged per usage, how frequently you're accessing it, as opposed to paying for a high tier and never using it. The size of objects in AWS is significantly increased. 50 terabytes is now the max object size. And S3 tables can now also be replicated to another region. So if there is a region outage, you will not have a large loss of data. The other big announcement was savings plans. So we all know that databases tend to last forever. They don't go away. So if you know you're going to build a database in AWS, you're probably going to have it for more than a year. So you can now prepay for that database and get up to 35% in savings, which is huge. The other big savings announcement was CloudFront can also be prepaid. So you can look at your CloudFront usage. In the past, it was pay per click or pay per data transfer. And so now you'll be able to look at your usage and prepay for a certain amount of data, and then you won't be overage for those spikes. And then the big announcement on AI was Graviton CPUs for ARM workloads and Trainium CPUs for AI inference. These are the new generations of those CPUs. I would recommend running on ARM first for standard workloads that aren't AI or for AI inference, and over Intel, and you should see a big reduction in savings. Now I'm going to pass it back to Tim to talk about what you should focus on.
All right, what should we do with all this information in the next 90 days? I got some ideas, as always. The first one, and we're doing this across all of our teams, is we are hooking up an agent to review every PR. Now, it can get a little verbose, but at least it gives us an idea of where to focus on when a human looks at it, because it will go through and give you a lot of information about the changes in the PR and what to look for, and it will have an opinion on what you need to change. But I found it does a really good job of being detailed and providing the human more focus as to what to look at. This can be done with a whole bunch of different agents, and it's relatively easy to do. It's not much of a cost impact, and I found that it helps the teams get better results for the PRs and faster PR merge speeds. So the time PR opens, so the time they get it into the main code line. The other thing I'd recommend, Kiro was announced. This thing's freaking cool. It is opinionated. It uses spec-driven development. It has multiple phases of that process. I'm a huge fan of Claude Code, and my work with Kiro has said it's at least as good, if not better. It is really good with the AWS world. So if you're using AWS, it is a great agent. Also, that indemnification that they offer, and it's integrated into your AWS account. So all the security measures that you get with that are all baked in all in one place. A lot of the benefits that I've seen people using the Copilot, I think, are now also going to be available for Kiro. The other thing Josh just mentioned, I don't know why this wasn't there earlier, but RDS, you have those databases, they load for freaking ever. They're not on demand. You don't change them up and down over time. AWS is now giving you a price break on that if you let them know ahead of time and you guarantee that you're going to use that over the year. Let's save a little bit more money. So AWS is focused on helping companies reduce their licensing costs from Microsoft. So they have tools for AWS Transform that will convert your Postgres schema or your Microsoft SQL schema into Postgres, which is open source and doesn't have licensing costs associated with it. The other thing it will do is not only will it change your database schema to use Postgres, it can then transform your code because your code's going to have to change if you change your database behind the scene, most likely. And so they've got AWS Transform that can change your system in order to use it to use the Postgres. The other thing, licensing cost related, is if you're using an .NET framework version that requires it to run on Windows, they have an AWS Transform that can migrate it to a .NET Core. .NET Core can run on Linux, so you don't need a Microsoft operating system license to run those workloads. And then I mentioned data quite a bit. If you aren't using Python, you're not familiar with Python, most, if not all, I mean, I think they have options, but generally these agentic tools are in the Python programming language. So if you don't know Python, I would say it is the critical language for people to know and understand in today's world and most likely in tomorrow's. It is a great language, it's a great ecosystem. It may be too open and too diverse, but that is a good problem to have. And then one other thing that I think is amazing. So does anybody remember what happened on October 20th, before Thanksgiving, before Halloween? Does anybody know what happened? Well, I'll remind you, your Netflix went out. Well, I don't know if Netflix did. Snapchat, Reddit, most of the internet went out on that day. And I heard everybody talking about, we need to go multi-cloud. We should be on all the different clouds to prevent ourselves from being impacted by that. And then, of course, on October 29th, Azure went out for a similar reason. And you don't need to be in multiple cloud for these specific things. You need to be in multiple regions to protect yourself against these types of things. And specifically, what happened with the issue on October 20th is a DNS issue. And so Route 53 in their US East region had some problems, and a lot of people rely on that region for those DNS lookups. So what Amazon did, they released this. I think it's brilliant. I don't know why it took so long, but they have accelerated recovery as a service they offer. And you can go into your Route 53. I just did this for our website. You can click a button, and for your public websites, they will manage your public DNS records and have a recovery time optimization target of 60 minutes to get things out of that region and get you back up to speed relatively quickly. So it'll be interesting. I think I don't know what it took on the backside to get all this done, but this will be a huge help. And hopefully the type of issues that we had in October, end of October, maybe will be mitigated, at least from the AWS standpoint. I'm sure Azure will come out with something very similar and quickly, because I know that these DNS issues have been a bear to deal with since the public cloud came out. I think we are near wrapping up. I think we maybe have some time for a Q&A.
I don't see anything in the chat. Is anyone willing to ask a question now? Have anything burning that they'd like to get answered from our team here? All right, well, then I'm going to put you all on the spot. I want to know if there's one thing that stood out to you most in the 5 days, which is a whirlwind down in Vegas. And you cannot say the line to get into Chainsmokers.
Who's first?
I'll take it away. I love Kiro. So when Kiro was introduced, I started using it that night and I created a little website. Everything was done through Kiro. So it set up my infrastructure, my CI/CD pipeline, everything. And I just did it through Kiro. Something that I would normally, it'll take me a day to do all that stuff. Kiro did it like that. And to me, that was so amazing. And then my current client doesn't deal with a lot of modernization, but I understand that problem, and AWS Transform is amazing. And what I like about it is that they took all the tools that have been proven to work, right? They have tools, they've had tools for migrating databases and migrating VMs and all that stuff, and they added that agentic portion to it. And now you're collaborating with this tool, and it's doing all the things that you need to do in a much faster way. So I think it's again that proposition of I am now going to be 5 times more productive than I used to be. So I was super excited about Kiro and Transform.
I was happy you finally showed your excitement for that, and you couldn't contain yourself in Vegas. So I appreciate you making sure everyone knew how great that tool is.
So Renee, there's a question in the chat about, they're already using GitHub Copilot. Does trying Kiro make sense for them?
That's a really hard question. It depends if you can use Kiro, right? Because some organizations are kind of, no, you have to use only this stuff. This is the only agents and AIs that you can use. But if that is offered to you, I would definitely try it out, An easy way to like get exposed to Kiro, and this is how I did it. I started doing the famous gilded rose kata and the pencil kata, and I just started doing little katas that you already do to sharpen your skills. But this time I did it with Kiro. And boy, it's gonna blow your mind. And then slowly, if you get permission from whoever you're working with, and if your organization allows it, then yeah, try to use Kiro and expose it to your code base, to your repo, and start developing with it and doing great things.
Go ahead.
I would say that next question about agent.io, I kind of look at Kiro as taking agent.io and some of the other. So agent.io has like a workflow on how to do that. And I think Kiro has built that into their opinionated way of delivering software with their spec driven. So I think it's a little less. Agent.io is pretty broad. It does quite a bit. It's got a pretty intense process. I think Kiro, for me, has been a good balance of make sure the specification of the plan is good before sending it off to do the code generation, and doing it in smaller chunks. Josh, what do you have as a takeaway?
I think Hero is amazing. One thing I did, Renee mentioned Transform. I took a .NET app that was written in VB, and it was written in Framework 4.5, and I converted it all the way to .NET 9. And I was like blown away. And it even handled web forms, which was something Transform could not handle in the past. I was like blown away. And then Kiro, I've been using Kiro for anything that that works with AWS because it understands the AWS ecosystem. So it also works with Q Developer. It's built on that heritage. So if you're familiar with that, where you can ask it questions about your infrastructure and it can answer them, you can do it right now within your IDE. It's phenomenal. And Kiro has a CLI, so it works just like Cloud Code too.
Cool. Is it my turn now?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we talked about the security frontier agent. I thought that was interesting. When we ran it internally, it found issues that our penetration tester or human penetration tester hasn't found. And so of course, I'm going to pester them a little bit to say, why are the AIs doing a better job than you are? So I thought that was interesting. The other thing that was really, I think it's too far out, but it's opened my mind quite a bit, is the idea of NovaForge. They are giving people, organizations, so many more places to customize models than you have before. Normally, the way to customize, you can like change the weights of an open source model, but you couldn't do it with anything else. And I think it's going to revolutionize the way other model providers provide customization. Are they going to give you their data set for what they're using to train it, where you can mix in your data, both pre and post? I just think it's going to revolutionize and create a new capability that organizations haven't had to create these smaller, more specialized language models over time.
I think one thing that was interesting too, I played with Agent Core, and it's got a CLI. You tell it what you want, it scaffolds it out for you, and within like 15 minutes, you can deploy an agent to Agent Core. So I think this is going to be the year of agent.
Yeah, and then these models, they also, are making serverless infrastructure for you to do that training, so you don't have to manage the infrastructure as much anymore either, which is just the barrier to entry for doing model customization is going to go down dramatically.
And I'll add, I think the thing that I left with was really the closing from Werner around the importance of all of you here on this call and the need to assure that you have ownership over what you produce and assure that our industry is as safe as possible given the accelerated adoption of these tools, right? There's a lot that can be produced, and while it's great to hear these things are faster and going to deliver more output and possibly value sooner, you are still responsible for that output and assuring that your businesses and the projects you're building are safe. So I left there really rejuvenated by that last presentation.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it was his last keynote. I always look forward to those.
I can say I left on a high note then, I guess, or my first one
Yeah.
was with him leaving on a high note. So, all right. Well, thank you. We're going to give you 10 minutes today to wrap up here, wrap up a little early. What you've seen here today isn't just a collection of the future concepts, right? Like these are real services, they're available now, and they're already changing how software is built, modernized, and operated. And thanks, Renee and Josh, for giving a few specific examples, right? These are in action. We believe these case studies really prove that organizations that win over the next 12 to 24 months won't be the ones that are experimenting. They'll be the ones that are operationalizing at the fastest. And we're here to help if you need it. If you saw something you saw today sparked questions, or if you're wondering where to start, what to prioritize, or how to move without increasing risk, we'd love to continue the conversation or do a deeper dive or a demo for you. And it's also worth noting that Josh is in the works of trying to revive the local AWS user group. So you can join us there once we get that up and running. We'll make sure we distribute once we get the first event started or sign up for our newsletter. You'll see our contact information here. We're always happy to set up a follow-up conversation tailored to you. Reach us when you feel the need to do so, and we'll publish the recording and slides and get those shared out via email here in the next few days. We really appreciate you joining us today, and we look forward to what you build next. Have a great rest of your day.